Cool, you both clicked it.
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. Well, for anyone listening, thank you for joining us. This is MSWA's Tough Talks, an interview series we're doing with faculty and staff and potentially other professionals. This is the pilot part of it. So we're here for our third and final pilot episode. The aim of this series is one, to kind of introduce faculty and staff to our students so that we can get to know them outside of a classroom environment and as people, and also encourage a sense of curiosity for our department and other people listening. My name is Chris. I was the president of MSWA in the 23-24 academic year. I'm here with Vale, who is the incoming vice president, and we're interviewing Dr. Lizano. And Dr. Lizano, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning to everyone. Well, not good morning, but hello, because I don't know when folks will be listening to this. My name is Erika Lizano. I am an associate professor in the Department of Social Work, primarily teaching courses revolving around macro practice, really emphasizing policy, management, supervision, organizational development, which includes things like grant writing, program design. Um, And as of this recording, I will have been with our department for 5 years.
I actually didn't know that you were that new of a faculty. I thought you had been here for a while.
Yes, so I spent the first 5 years post PhD at Cal State San Bernardino. So I was
Mm.
tenure line faculty there for 5 years before coming to Fullerton. So it was a little bit of a nonlinear journey to get to Fullerton.
Well, I think you teed me up with the word nonlinear. I guess to whatever degree you're comfortable with, do you mind like giving us the overview of like your path to being a professor here? Because I think as a student, especially professors who have like doctorates, you kind of assume they just choose a path and then they succeed at it super well, and then they're professors. So I wanted to see if you would share your journey with us.
Certainly, I'm happy to share my journey. Definitely not a linear journey. So I actually did my undergraduate studies at Cal State Fullerton. I'm an alumna. Um, Never really planned to come back as faculty. When the opportunity presented itself, I thought it was a very natural fit and opportunity that I wanted to take and pursue. Not take because it's not offered quite that way. Pursue rather. But I initially started after my undergrad, I went straight into a PhD program in sociology. It wasn't the strongest fit for me. Um, as it turns out, I recognized then that I was interested in applied research. Um, and that wasn't quite what I was being trained to do. And not that there's anything wrong with non-applied research. It just felt to me like it wasn't in alignment with the part of me that felt like my research and my skills, whatever skills I had at the moment, needed to be used to somehow impact community in the field. And so I dropped out of that PhD program feeling really bad about myself, to be frank. It was likely one of the hardest times in my life. I was quite young, first gen, so I couldn't believe that I had voluntarily, after so much work, because it took a lot of effort to get accepted, right, straight from undergrad. Um, to then say like I'm not going to do this, this is not a fit. So I felt a lot of, I want to say probably shame is probably the best way to describe it. I had, though, when I applied to the PhD programs, had also applied to MSW programs at several universities because I was considering a social work degree. Hold on, can I pause? Do you edit this? Is this
We
get
don't.
edited or does it go? Oh, okay.
No.
Okay, never mind.
We
my
could,
little
but we don't.
my background did some weird things. I was gonna move whatever's back there, but anyway, I digress. If you ever take a class with me, this is pretty much what it's like to be lectured
Mhm.
by me. Um, so welcome. And so I had been debating after my undergrad if I wanted to do an MSW, if I wanted to do a PhD. I went with the PhD, bad idea. Went to the MSW, and I contacted the institutions that had accepted me and asked if they would reinstate my admission despite me turning them down, right? And so two institutions had said yes. However, one said what we had offered you in your financial aid package is no longer available, but you can start now. The other institution said the package is fully available, And you'd also demonstrated interest in the dual masters. If you're interested, we'll consider you for that as well. Um, and that's how I ended up at USC and um, finished my MSW, my MPA, was working in the field only about a year and a half. And then that like burning desire to do research, um, which had just like smoldered out just of the shame,
Uh-huh.
came came crashing back, just like full force, you know. I found myself asking questions like when I was in the field, like noticing what I now know to be burned out people. Um, I was fascinated by these folks, you know, like, ooh, what's happening? Um, and then I decided I'm gonna apply to a PhD program, but this time much more focused. I only the second time around I only applied to 3 PhD programs in social work or social welfare. And I thought, okay, if this doesn't happen, it's okay. Like it's just not meant to be. And I got into them all actually, and then decided on staying at SC because I had built some relationships, and my advisor there had really strong. Her research was strongly aligned with my interests. Um, and then I got a PhD.
Got a PhD done.
Well, no, it was 6 years, but it was a wonderful 6 years. I think I also tell my students a lot that, it is not like the MSW experience, right, where you're in the field and you're sort of, managing both coursework and, your academic, training. You're This is so cheesy, but I describe it as like an academic athlete. Like your
Hmm.
skill set is to be an academician, right? Like you're being trained to be a scholar. And truly it's one of the most beautiful experiences because being first gen, coming in I grew up in a home where my mom cleaned homes while I was growing up, right? Like so labor to me is really sacred, and I think work brings meaning to a lot of us. And this is my work. Like my work is to think and write and ponder and I take it really seriously because I understand how privileged of a position it is to say like this is my job. And so um I thought it was like I said, a beautiful privileged position to spend 6 years of my life just thinking and postulating and saying this is what these are my thoughts, this is what I think is happening, this is what I theorize, this is how I'm testing it. I just thought it was like a really dope experience, and I couldn't believe that that was what I was being allowed to do. And then I was deserving of it. I think for a long time I was really doubtful um about whether or not I was deserving of sharing space with these scholars who I saw as almost like bigger than life, and they're folks just like you and I, um, perhaps more refined than me, but that doesn't mean that what I thought was any less value. It doesn't mean that I didn't have, you know, critiques that were valuable and worthy. And so I slowly started to understand that, and understand that what I had to say didn't have to be perfect. I just had to have a logical, like it had to be a cogent argument. It didn't have to be the only argument. It didn't have to be gospel. Like you don't have to listen to me, but I have I have an argument to make, and it's worthy. So yeah, it was a really cool 6 years. If ever folks consider an academic journey, I think um it life doesn't stop. It's actually one of the best years. I would say until now, some of the best years of my life.
Cool. I feel like a lot that we could like unpack. I guess for me, I'll start with like the stuff you just wrapped up on, and like what you're describing sounds like imposter syndrome. Though I've been on that train of like not calling it imposter syndrome and like recognizing that people are systematically excluded and that's why they feel like that. But putting that to the side, I think imposter syndrome comes up a lot in the MSW program. Like my first
Mhm.
year practicum class, like every week that was like the point of discussion. And I know you talked about like it took 6 years and it wasn't right away, but like how did you like navigate that or like quote unquote like get over it? Like it sounds like it might still linger every once in a while, but like for the most part, like you feel comfortable where you're
Yeah, no, I definitely think it still lingers, and I give myself pep talks all the time. I think what was helpful to me, so I think one of the biggest challenges for me was actually I felt like it was a lot of class issues. So when I arrived in these academic spaces, sure, everyone is there because of intellectual merits, right? And reminding myself of that. It's like I am here because of my academic merits, my intellectual merits. But it was hard to ignore that a lot of these folks had parents who had PhDs, had parents who had MDs, had parents who had JDs, had parents who could proofread their dissertations for them, and I didn't have that. I saw my social capital as being less dense or maybe less than. But then I started to remind myself, like, well, no, I do know people who are some of the smartest people I know, some of the most brave and brilliant people I know are folks who can't even read. I've done work um, in my like young adult life till now with the Salvadoran community and in El Salvador, and I've been around folks who are survivors of civil war. I've talked to women who talk me through how, they protected their children while bombings were happening, folks who are in their brilliance, led movement, literally folks though who cannot read and write, but are brilliant. And so I reminded myself, like, this is just one form of intellect to be manifested. It is not the only, right? Like, yes, we may have the loudest voice, like, especially in like a Western country, our publications are read more. I'm going to publish more than my colleagues in El Salvador because I read and write in English, but that doesn't make me smarter than them. And so it's like, I had to remind myself, like, this is who I come from. Like, these folks are survivors, they're resilient, and they're smart. It doesn't present like my colleagues who had the parents who are MDs, PhDs, economists, but I have value, And so I think those were like the pep talks I gave
at.
myself. It's like, I'm a survivor. Like, this isn't, I'm not going to be embarrassed by this. But I did have moments. And I think one of the hardest for me was class differences, where you see the difference, where I had a very healthy stipend to support me during my PhD program. And I still had to have jobs because my brother was an undergrad and I was helping him. My mom obviously always had very modest jobs. She's a hardworking woman, but she needed my help. And so I didn't have that same experience of saying, like, I just have to worry about me. Like I had a collective group of folks who was dependent on me. And I thought, like, if I can do it this way, like, there's very little that I can't. So I think it's a reminder. I think it's a remind yourself of like your social capital, and it may not present exactly like it does within the university setting or within these professional settings, but draw on those, I don't know, the storytelling, the narratives, the values that are passed down to us, and maybe in very informal ways, right? Like, I'm a kid of immigrants. Like, hard work is hard. Like, you confront it and you you take it on the chin. Like, you're like, okay, I'm not afraid of hard work. I know what hard work looks like. So it's just a reminder. Remind yourself that we're some resilient folk, and it'll take a lot, to it'll take a lot to sort of knock us down. And then also, like, you may not be the most refined person in the room, but that doesn't mean that what you have to say isn't of value. Like, you don't have to wait until you can perfectly articulate a thought to share it. Do it in the best way you can in that moment, and you will eventually evolve into that if you want to. If you don't want to, you don't have to either. It's just if you want to.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing a lot is like taking perspective, and like I think when you're in academia, it's really easy for academia to become everything. And like I feel like you're talking like putting it in the actual perspective, like this is just research and there's still all this other stuff, and like all this other stuff is also valuable. It reminds me of in this past year, like doing an internship at a community college, like I would often tell clients of like, yo, you got a lot going on, and take it from me, like the transferring stuff like is a lot easier than the life stuff you got going on. And something about like my clients understanding like, oh, like this life stuff is hard and is like, not just this thing in my way. I feel like helps people like embrace their journey. On the note of embracing, not to like tack on to like the low points of the story you shared, but I think the first PhD stands out to me the most, and this might be me projecting my own journey. But I guess like when you were in the sociology PhD, like how did you know it was a bad fit? Like, and like how did you like get yourself to listen? Because I feel like it's easy for people who go in academia, like they're there because they're stubborn. That's what makes them great at what they do. Like, how did you let go of that?
I think, I felt an interest in the research, but I didn't feel passion. Um, and then I was having a hard time thinking like how that would lead to at least what I was going to be doing, like how it was going to lead to actual change, like implementable change, like what it meant for the actual, like for real, for people, people's lived experiences. Um, and so it kind of like hit me one day, and I think I woke up one day like kind of freaking out, like, oh my God, like, am I going to do this for 5 years? So there's like some costs, right? Like it's like an economic concept. And so I was like, well, I've already invested this much time. I can't quit now. But it's like, no, I can't invest any more time is really what it is. It's like being in a bad relationship. You can't be like, well, I can't break up with them now because I've been together with them for a year. We just be with them for another 10 terrible years. Like, no. I thought, this isn't for me. I packed up my stuff. I was like, I gotta go home. I don't even know what I'm gonna do. But I knew that it wasn't a fit. I knew that I wasn't passionate about it. Um, and I thought to myself, wow, I'm gonna wait 5 years to then do what? Pivot and get an MSW, right? That doesn't sound. And so I decided not to do that. Um, and fortunately, and I did like panic, and I contacted a mentor of mine who's a very calm person in crisis. And he said to me, he's former military gentleman from the South. He's like, Erica, get it together. This is what you're gonna do. And I think it was a weekend. I think I was crying. He's not the best with feelings, but very, guided me in other ways. And he's like, okay, you're gonna calm down, and you're gonna wake up tomorrow, and you're gonna call these people, and you're gonna tell them what happened. And a couple of schools said, yeah, sure, we still have a spot. So I was able to pivot, but yeah, I don't know. I knew it wasn't my passion, and I projected, right? So, which I don't know if that was a good or a bad thing, but I was like, do I see myself this taking me where I need to be in 5 years? And I was really like intrigued by the allure. I would have been, math would have been to, if I would have taken 5 years, I would have been 27 with a PhD. And for some reason, that sounded like a great idea.
That sounds
And
great.
it's really ridiculous because I wasn't ready, right? These numbers don't mean anything. I was not ready to be there. It wasn't my time. I don't know where I was going so quickly. I don't know what was going to happen magically at 27 that I needed to be done with. Like, this is crazy. Why am I pressuring myself? And so I don't know. I got lucky, I guess, that I talked myself out of it. And this person had helped me apply to the PhD program. And I really appreciated that instead of him saying to me, you have to do this, he and my other mentor, she said the same thing, Erica, if this isn't for you, don't invest 5 years in it. You're gonna regret it. And immediately thought, okay, if these folks are saying it's okay. And I remember like asking my mom, and my mom didn't really have a context for it. I think then she still didn't fully understand what a PhD was. She was like, oh, well, we already feel like you've accomplished what you need to. You have a bachelor's degree, whatever you do next is up to you. And so it was kind of nice to be relieved from what I thought were other people's expectations, because truly they didn't have them of me. What they wanted is for me to be content.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of emotional reactions to that story. Just thinking about my own research journey. I think for me, I want to ask about like zooming out and dealing with like setbacks or failures or quote unquote failures, because I hate that word. But I know like as someone who being here in social work is technically like a pretty huge pivot and had to make other pivots throughout my career. Like a mid pivot always feels really bad. Of like, even if everyone's telling you it's the right thing and you can rationalize it and it makes sense and it feels right, it always feels like yucky to have to like
Mhm.
make that change. And it's something I noticed, particularly with like younger researchers or younger students, of like the first setback, and it's like hit the panic button, like the world falling apart. It's like
Right.
as someone who works with students, like you're a capstone professor, who off air, Dr. Cap, like it was funny, he called it like more clinical doing capstone, like you're helping people in that one-on-one setting. Like what's your general advice, or like how do you help people navigate setbacks or failures? Because it seems like people aren't super good at least not at first.
Yeah, I feel like there's this piece of advice that a faculty member gave me, or a professor gave me when I was in the PhD program. She wasn't even my advisor, and actually now she's the dean at one of the schools of social work. Really wonderful woman who I admire very much, Dorian Traub. She said to me once, "Erica, this is not your final performance. This does not have to be your best work. This has to be the best you can do right now. You are you got your whole career to keep working on this, right? If you could do this immediately and like perfectly now, you'd already have a PhD, right? And so I tell my students that a lot. Like in the capstone journey, it's like if you were already a researcher, or if you already had your master's, you would have done this already. This wouldn't be new. But this is the first time you're doing this. Why would you expect it to be perfect? It makes no sense. You have to almost have the humility to say, I am in a learning role. I'm learning. It's not going to be perfect, you know? And it'd be weird if it was your best and perfect work, because then what's left after? Everything is downhill. Like you're supposed to ascend. You know, you want to go upward. You want an upward trajectory. And so the expectation should not, and I remember vividly when she said that, it's like, this isn't your final performance, you know? This is you're learning, you're growing. And so yes, I think that that's my advice to students. Like, if you knew all of this, you'd already have your master's. So why would you be here then? Why be here? You're not here to learn. So it is supposed to be a challenge. There are questions, and it's kind of like regrouping and saying, okay, let me get my bearings straight. Is that a thing? I'm bad with idioms, by the way, and I don't know why I insist on using them. But anyway, get your life together. and and then you're just like, okay, I'm gonna try this again. Let's go for it. And I mean, gosh, if that isn't, if my dropping out of a PhD program isn't symbolic of that, I don't know what is. It's like, phew, you know, push your
Yeah.
shoulder off and let's do this. It was a bumpy road, but I don't know what it was. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. It's just like, all right, let's do this. Let's do it again. Let's try it again.
Yeah, sometimes the road is just bumpy, and that's just because it's bumpy and nothing else. I like that you frame it through learning, because I think that's how I cope with like adversity. Um, like for me, like with the imposter syndrome first year, um, I got to this point where I was like, I keep asking myself if I'm good enough to be a clinician, and I was like, that's not even a good question. Like, what's the answer is yes or no. Like, it doesn't really do much for me. And like framing it of like, okay, how do I get better as a clinician? Like, I feel like dropped the pressure, but also like made me actually get better. And like I feel like that stance of curiosity is like where I find the most comfort. And I'm reminded of like when I work with clients, or when I worked with clients at the community college. It's their first couple years of undergrad, or they're coming back to school. There's all these barriers, and I'd often like tell them like, maybe this is the part where you learn this thing, or the part where you figured this out. I'm like, that's what this part of your life is for. So I love like that, like taking that stance of curiosity. I'm also mindful that I've been hanging up the air for half an hour. So, Vale, do you want to jump in with any questions?
Um, I think I have two questions. My first question is, I'll ask both and then you can answer how you see fit. Um, was how your transition from an MSW to a PhD in social work was, and like how you knew that was the route for you after doing your MSW. And my other question is like what, they're so different, but what's something that we can, as incoming second years, kind of keep in mind about capstone projects and make it like worth our while to really invest our time into something that is really meaningful to us as researchers or as social workers. Those are very different, but
Yeah, no, and I'll answer them in order so as to not forget. My recent reason for PhD is because I love research. I don't know that I describe myself as a good researcher, but that doesn't matter because what I care about is I'm curious as hell. I got all kinds of questions. I have all kinds of questions. I write them down and I'm like, one day I'll answer that. And that like burning curiosity is what keeps me going. And I'm like a little less concerned about, or I'm a lot less concerned about being, oh, top researchers are in my field. No, it's I have a meaningful question and I want to find some answers. That's what drives me. So that's why I knew I needed to get a PhD because no other space. Well, I get, you could do like research for other folks, but I also very much cared about doing what I want to do. So my research, I decide what I want to do. Some of it is like highly fundable, some of it is not. And that is not as important to me as like the pursuit of just knowledge. I enjoy it. I love it actually. Enjoy is an understatement. I love it. And sometimes the people around me probably drives them nuts because I have like postulate all kinds of random stuff. And that's okay. So I knew that because of my love for research, I wanted it to be a part of my life. But I also really love teaching, and I had no idea I loved teaching. So in my program, I went to school at an R1. The unpopular truth is that they don't teach you to teach. That's just not true. And they force you to teach because you do have to teach, right? Not force, but it's part of our funding. And then I realized I loved it, right? I realized that I love teaching. I realized that there's like this very important relationship very appropriate but important relationship you build with students where you can see people sort of have those like aha moments, that it's like, that's right. And once they get there, they're gonna fly fast, further than you can ever imagine, right? And so it's like walking that journey with folks. It's almost like getting them going and then they're off, And so I really enjoyed teaching. And so, which I didn't know. I didn't know I'd enjoy teaching until I had to do it. So I wanted to teach and I wanted to do research, and that's why I pursued a PhD. Now, in terms of the capstone, I think, it's part of a requirement. And I have conversations with my students and I'm very honest. Like you can meet the requirements and these are the basic things. Or if you're saying, I want to pursue potentially a PhD or something that's publishable, then I look at the work with a different lens. So then as they develop their research question, I might say, this is not exactly unique. We know the answer to this. Now I have some folks where I'm like, I know the answer to this. And they'll say, well, it's okay. That's what I'm going to do. Cool. Let's do it. I'm down. But if they're saying like, I need it to be unique enough so that's making a unique contribution, then that's when I coach students in a different way. So that's when we talk about things like, what is the added value to the field? Are you interested in learning some analysis, methods or essentially statistical analyses that I don't typically teach, but I will teach you if you want to do something different. So I think the key is to verbalize it very early on to your advisor or to your capstone instructor so they know the path you're on. I don't think it just magically happens that people have like, the top capstones. It's typically people who set out with the intention from the beginning. I want this to be interesting enough, and because it's both like an interesting and compelling question, and then also the methods and analyses, right? And so you need a different approach. And the best way to do that is let your instructor know ahead of time so that you can walk that journey with that eye together.
Wow. That makes me feel a little bit better about it. I feel like it's a very like out of reach, kind of overwhelming almost like venture that we're going into for second year, but it's nice to have an idea of like how we should go into it and to really just be honest about what we want out of it, because I feel like that's the best way to take advantage of the opportunity to basically do like mini research.
Yeah, and it's on a continuum, right? Again, you're gonna have folks who are like, I want to do the most basic thing, and that's okay. Like, I have no judgment. Like, do you? But and I'm like, and I'm here for it, but I'm also here for the kids that are like, or students, sorry. Everyone's younger than me, so I call them kids. The students that are like, Dr. L, one day I want a PhD, so this needs to be good. This is gonna be my written sample, or I'm gonna try to publish this. Then we're on the same page. And then I'm gonna come at you a little bit different, I'm gonna tell you, did you read all the literature? Because I've seen this question before. So, it's a different approach. But definitely the first person that has to be tuned into that is yourself and the instructor.
Awesome. I just really quickly back to the MSW to PhD. How was it to, this might be very specific and honestly like just a selfish question, but how was the application process to PhD? And like, did that deter you or in any way, or do you feel like you were set up well in the MSW to kind of pursue that after the fact?
So the MSW, in my humble opinion, and no shade, I had a great MSW experience. That was not the intent, right? Because an MSW is a terminal degree. So
Yeah.
nowhere is really there a commitment to say we're preparing future scholars. Like, it isn't like sociology where you get a master's in soc to get, to go on to a PhD in soc. It is not that. But when I was an undergrad, I was in a program called McNair Scholars, which is intended to help diversify academe, essentially people of color as professors. I mean, I feel like it worked. I feel like I should be the poster child. Um, and so I had done like the GRE, but they paid for like a coach. Like, it was the most intense summer of my life. Like, they paid for this private coach. The coach like five of us, right? We would go. It was like 8-hour day. I mean, they fed us and they made it fun, but it was like your goal is to, even though the narrative was like, this is just a formality. You can do this. You can score well, and once you get in there, your research is what's going to guide you. So they prepared me with like the GRE scores. They prepared me, like, I had developed a letter of intent, or really like what were my research interests, because it's a different type of application. So it's like, what are my research interests? Can I convey that? And then I had written and published in a peer-reviewed student journal, and that was my written sample, but it was through McNair. So McNair had sort of built me up to, like, they had paid for me to go to a conference, and then I was also Sally Casanova Scholar, which is a CSU system-wide program that similar goals. They aim to support you in they aim to support diversifying faculty, and so um, they also provided funding for me to like present at conferences. So like, I had a CV that was decent, um, not great by any means. You see folks that are like, oh, I got 4 publications. That was not me. But it was enough to like throw my hat in the ring. And they had prepared us for, like, they did some coaching on like how to interview, because these are day-long interviews. Like, the PhD interviews were sometimes like 8-hour days. If you're a finalist, you go sometimes 2 days. People would fly out. So they prepared me. So MSW is just not intended to do that.
Yeah, also I'll jump in because I know you're thinking about applications. I think one of the things that people who haven't applied don't understand is that how much people behind you need to get through the application cycle. Like, you literally need recommenders, but also like at least in clinical, it's like there's like it's like built into the system. Like, they support their lab people who are applying. I didn't apply from clinical psych lab, so I was a little just like haphazardly pulling in supports from random places. But if you can find people, and you're literally my mentee, so we'll talk at some point. But if you can find people to like help you in the process, like the application's very much like a team effort, even if it doesn't feel like that from the outside looking in. So you'll figure it out, and we'll talk. Um, I want to jump in, and one thing that struck me as you were talking about, I think the first question about like loving research. First, it reminded me of my PI from undergrad, where she was like, "When I get new data, it's like Christmas morning," and I was like, maybe I don't like research because that's super strong. Like Christmas morning is a really strong way to describe like seeing your analyses. Or maybe my analyses are just not significant, so I don't get the feeling that she gets. Um, but I love like the framing your staying in academia through like burning curiosity and like meaningful questions. But one thing I want to ask about is that like something that I've talked to a lot of people about is like, how do you do academia and not play the game of academia, or decide how much you want to play it? And it sounds like you've opted out of the game, which I like really respect. But like for you, like was that hard, and like how do you maintain those boundaries versus it can be all consuming if you aren't careful?
Right. Yeah, it can definitely be all consuming. I mean, this is a weird job. Um, because there's always more you could do, right? There's always more you can perfect. There are always more questions. But it isn't my sole identity. Like my curiosity, like I can answer questions like through observation of the world around me. So it's one way that I fulfill that need. It isn't the only way. Academia is it's a hierarchical place by nature. And I think just being okay with not being at the top of the hierarchy, like that was never really my intention. Like I'm happy to be in the space. Um, and that's enough. And why? Oh, okay. So I think I know why. I was talking about this the other day. I feel like I was sended as much as I'm going to. Because I grew up, it was a tough coming up. I grew up really poor. We grew up on welfare. My mom's literally an immigrant who fled civil war. So I'm like, yo, I made it. I don't need to be the top professor. I survived some stuff. And that's good enough for me. Like I don't need to be validated in this system. I am so aware of the resilience that it's taken to get me here, of the collective effort. Like folks have had to like read my, applications. They've had to coach me. Like I didn't even know how to sit at a proper dinner table until my mentor had to teach me. And he said, "You do not eat until everyone eats. This is the fork you use," because I had never been exposed to this, having grown up like a poor kid from the hood. So to me, it's like I've made it. I'm at the top of my game, and I don't need to like my sense of comparison, like it's not a comparable experience. So I will not use the standards that are developed of academia to decide whether or not I'm successful because they're flawed, right? They don't take into account the great amount of effort it's taken in like reparative work and a lot of like collective trauma, individual traumas, like you can't capture that. And I'm to unwilling to let those folks dictate if I'm successful or not. So it yeah, we're just not comparable. That's okay. So that's kind of how I've made sense of it. And I love that I teach where I came up. It's probably seen by many as a failure in many ways because in academia, they teach you like you go to be at the top of your field and you launch as far away from where you came from as possible. But there's nothing wrong from where I came from. These people, these students are me. I am them. I belong here. And I don't think it's like a failure to launch. It's what I owe to my community. Like this is where I came up and it will be where others come up. And that's not a failure. I also that's super like those values are not my values. Like my value, what I value is my community. Like my husband and I grew up in LA. this is home to us. I don't actually live in Orange County. I live in LA County, by the way. I should disclose that. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that, like, you know, he grew up in South LA. Like, he feels very strongly that that's where he practices social work. You know, this is where we came up. So we're not by any means a failure in those senses, but to some people, you know, they're like, you got R1 training, you should be at an R1. No, I will be where I need to be, where I feel like I need to be, and I'm super happy where I am. So yeah, I don't know. That's how I escaped the game, I guess.
I think something that really stood out to me was how you were mentioning that you didn't have those like academic focused family members that kind of could give you that push that a lot of other people do. And I definitely felt that when applying for the masters and everything. My family does not know anything about academics. My mom doesn't have a degree. My dad has a BFA, so he knows even less about research and everything. Um, so I feel like that is also very consistent throughout, especially like my cohort, but I know just in terms of people who are in these spaces of academics and having that imposter syndrome, yes, but also feeling like, and this is just me projecting, but like feeling almost inept or that you're not supposed to take up that space or you don't know what you're doing and that's kind of your fault because you're not from a family that knows these type of things. So do you have any, and you've kind of touched on a little bit, but do you have any specific advice for students who are coming from a background of other sides of life that aren't academic focused and being able to kind of transition into that and apply it into your academics and your research and everything like that?
Yeah, I think definitely we're inherently resilient and resourceful. So it's like, be scrappy about it. If you need questions asked, or ask. Take a ask. There's nothing wrong with asking, right? So it's like, ask, figure it out. Um, I was rarely embarrassed to ask questions that maybe some people thought were stupid or obvious. Like, I don't care. I just want my question answered. And then also, like, the way we occupy spaces, it wasn't just for me. I think I mentioned this. Like, you know, I grew up with a single mom. Like, I would bring her to campus. We had a PhD lab. You could see Miriam was up in there. People knew my mother. She'd come in, say hi to everyone because it was like, no, like, she is part of me. And I, not only do I deserve to be here, my mom does too. She's my family. So you'd see me on campus. You'd see me with my mom. Even now, you might see me. I go often to campus with my mom and my kids. Yesterday, I took my oldest to campus because, like, no, these spaces are ours as well. You know, I grew up down the street from USC. When I was a kid, even though there were no walls, we knew we didn't belong there. Like, we wouldn't go on campus, right? Like, that's ridiculous. And so now, I'm like, no, I would bring her. I'd tell her, like, we're gonna have lunch on campus, and I do that now even here. And it's like, it's not, instead of us being feeling maybe an embarrassment, like, oh, my family doesn't know. It's like, no, I will. Not only am I learning, but I'm bringing my people with me. You know, to teach them this journey. Like, we're learning together. This is our journey, and that includes the people who have brought me here. Maybe they didn't bring me here in the same way that others did, like they didn't, you know, read your application or something, but they brought you here in shaping who you are as a person. Like, they've taught you so much to be where you are now. It's like, no, include them, bring them to the office, you know, have them around. It's okay. It's more than okay. So I think it's feeling less pressure to somehow, what are you, like, clairvoyant? How are you supposed to know these things? Ask. Don't be embarrassed to ask. You know, I literally, can I be honest, y'all? When I started at Fullerton my first year, I didn't know what the difference was between a teacher and a professor. Like, I didn't know what a PhD was. I happened to be in a class, taking a stats class, and the professor said to me, you know, you're so good at this. Let me teach you about stats. And he's a biostatistician, and started teaching me statistics and SPSS and blah, blah, blah. But I had no idea. And that's when I started learning, like, oh, you have special training. Oh, I had no clue. I just knew I got into universities, so you don't have to know it all. You're learning. It's okay. You're not here by yourself. Bring the family, bring the friends, occupy these spaces. They're ours, no shame.
That's so crazy because I never even considered that before, like bringing my family on campus. Because in my mind, I'm like, the one and only time they're going to see anything that I've like produced in my grad program is at graduation and hooding. Like that's going to be like the first time they really, and even then they're not really going to understand what it is or what I do or anything. So that really shines a light on maybe how some ways I can incorporate them a little bit more into that realm of my life, because it feels so big when I'm at school and then I leave campus and then it's like nothing, and like no one, it's just like a side like quest that I'm doing. So it's really interesting to hear different perspectives on how I can incorporate more of my normal day-to-day life into school.
Yeah, bring
Yeah.
them to the library, bring them to the Starbucks,
Uh,
bring them, they change art exhibits on campus, so I'll take them on different days, or even littles. If you have nieces, nephews, cousins, neighbors, like teaching our children that like these are spaces we belong in if they choose to, right? I'm not saying college is for everyone, but it's not a space you don't belong in.
yeah, I like the idea of taking up space and making it your own. It reminds me of like when I transferred and those feelings of like I don't belong here, and then that like evolved into like, well, too bad, like I'm here, like this is mine, like you got to deal with it. And also I think it's important to like just see it sometimes. Like I think of a client
Mhm.
once, he was like 10, and he was like, oh, I can't go to college because I'm this race. And I was like, that's not true. So I took him to Cal State Fullerton and I was like, look around. And he's like, what do they look like? He's like me. So I think, understanding like that these spaces don't belong to any particular group is really important. And then be able to jump in on your thing about like not having the people to support certain goals. Like I remember being in a meeting once in my PI, she's department chair at a school. She was like, I'm reading my son's college essay. And I was like, that's crazy to me. Like the fact that
Mhm.
your parents could like support you in that way. And then her support would actually probably be pretty good. Um, so if you don't have that, like, or anyone listening, if you don't have that, like, go out and get it. I think, sorry, for me, like, I would be sending cold emails like it was my job of like, hey, I saw you at a panel. I saw you on this lab website. Can we talk? Or I had like an informational interview assignment. I had to do like one. I just use an excuse to talk to like 20 people. I have this assignment. I mean, this interview right now is a little bit like that. Of like, I don't have to do this, but it's a good excuse to pick the brain of some of my favorite professors. Um, I know that we're close on the hour now, so I'm going to try to wrap up with some quicker questions.
Okay.
First one is, it's come up a bit about like holding your values and like keeping perspective. So I think that it will likely go in that direction again. But as like a parent faculty, like that's a tough balance to maintain. So now that you've done it for a couple of years, or you are a parent and you're successful in your job, like what's your general like? If someone's like, how do I maintain my work-life balance? Like, what's your go-to like response to that?
Right. Well, I'm a workforce researcher.
Fair
So
enough.
I think that, I know the research says that like if work interferes with meeting life demands or life interferes with meeting work demands, it creates a really stressful environment. So some of the things I've had to learn is to be mindful of um what responsibilities I take on. I get very excited. So I'm like a very like enthusiastic person. And so sometimes I have to check myself like, okay, I won't say yes or no immediately. Let it sink in before I um sign up for stuff realistically. So it's like be mindful of um be mindful of the commitments you're making. I also think like professionally, I think of myself as improving gradually. So like this journey is lifelong, like you're forever learning, so it's like okay, um I kind of set more realistic goals, like I will improve I will only change 30 or 40% of my lectures for next year that need improvement based on comments. I don't say like, let me throw out my whole class, because that would be a complete overhaul, So it's like, where are you, like, targeted improvements? Um, and yes, work provides us meaning, but ultimately, like, your family or whoever are the meaningful people. Like, you don't have to have children. You can be child free and not sleep deprived like me. But whatever you value, there should be something else, and what are those things? And they hold value, because there will always be work to do. I mean, this is social work. Like, for the love of all that is good, there will always be social problems. And at some point, you've got to turn that off and say, like, it isn't my singular sort of responsibility to do this. It's like, whatever little corner of the world I'm taking on, I will do that well within the constraints of my abilities as a person. What fills me up. Um, what do I find value in? What do I enjoy? And some of those things will converge. Some of the things will converge, and that is the ideal. Like, if it doesn't align, like, with my research, and my research has to be like in workforce stuff or immigrant and refugee communities. If I do program evaluation work, same thing, because I do consulting sometimes. It has to fit there. If it doesn't, I'm not doing it. And my volunteer work is with immigrant and refugee communities. Not that I don't value other social problems, it's just I cannot take them all on. And this is just what is most meaningful to me, as a kid of immigrants, you know, uh, so that's it. And if it doesn't fit within that, I'm like, it's important, but I cannot.
I'm hearing just kind of, okay, Bale's gone, being intentional and kind of working with yourself versus against yourself, and also like not just doing things for the sake of doing them. A lesson that I'll try to take with me as I graduate. Um, I guess with the other kind of quicker questions, Gavin's not here. He couldn't be here because he is resting like he should be. But he's been asking everyone that he can, like, if they have book recommendations. He's been assembling his summer reading list. So are there books he'd recommend to Gavin specifically, but just students in general?
I think a short, fun read, The Four Agreements. Super short. I think it's just really meaningful to think about, I don't know, just sort of like ways to live life. That's been a really important book to me. The Four Agreements. I feel like anything by Greg Boyle,
Mhm.
please, just I
You
don't
just feel
know.
good after.
Yeah, I don't know Father Boyle, but if he's not a social worker, I don't know how he's not. And I'm not like a religious person or anything, so this
Mhm.
isn't like me like pushing my religiosity on folk. But this is just like someone who, in my opinion, just like exudes social justice and like kinship and alignment with folks. And I think in many ways, and in most ways, it should be a lot of how we do our work. Um, so I think anything by Father Boyle, um, and definitely The Four Agreements. Um, I am currently on like this tip on reading Roxane Gay, but it's not really related to social work. It's just, she's a Black feminist writer. I love the stuff she writes. And bell hooks.
Mhm.
Eternally, I think one of the some of the work that really just like resonates with me. Um, I would say brought a lot of change to my life, All About Love, and sort of the transformative power of love, and not in like some weird gushy way, but in how like radical the idea of love is. Self-love, love and community, love in the work that we do, love in how we work with others. And so um yeah, I think All About Love by Bell Hooks changed my life. And I would wager that if folks picked it up and read it, it would really uh, bring a lot of, yeah, it would get you to think a lot about your own life, about the work you do, about how you relate to others, how you relate to yourself. Big one. So yeah, those are my recommendations.
I'm actually reading All About Love right now, so I'm like, yes, like it is changing me in the moment. And I also recommend that a client read Will to Change by Bell Hooks. Um, so yeah, Bell Hooks I think is a fan favorite. Last question, unless Vale has anything, is the second years or the first years are now second years. The graduates are new social workers. So I guess as both cohorts like navigate this big change for everyone, like any advice for the now second years or the new graduates that you want to leave them with?
The second years, I would say, you own what you've learned, stay positive. I find in my first year, like teaching first years, like people are like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited. Second years, sometimes I'm like, yo, people, throw me a bone here. I'm giving you my best material. Stay with it. Don't disconnect. Don't disengage. Stick it out, right? Like you're not done learning just because you're in the second year. You're not done learning ever, frankly. There's like a humility that comes with accepting, like, I'm never going to be done learning till I like retire or I'm no longer on this earth, right? So like, oh, like tap back in, don't tap out. This is not the time. So I would say like just stay with it. Um, you do have like the wisdom and experience of first year, and you're also, still making room for learning. And I think for my newly hired social workers, this is just the beginning. If you don't land the perfect job immediately, welcome to the world. And I don't know, like you don't have to immediately find a plan out. Like just Chris, you underscored this during your speech. Like grow where you're planted. I know Deborah says that a lot. Professor Saxton, I know Marcela says that a lot. Like do you do it well? Take note of the things you don't like. Take note of the things that are working because no workplace is going to be perfect. And then learn from that. It's not. I think having an expectation like your very first job is going to be like this perfect place, and I'm just so obsessed with it, and it's so wonderful. That doesn't happen. Like everything has its strengths and limitations. Lean into the strengths, the limitations, do something about it. See if you can change it. Don't uh like fall into this like constantly complaining. But that has to do more with personality though. When some people are just like that. So that's not helpful. But what I'm saying is it's not going to be the perfect job, and it's not supposed to be. You're learning and you'll forever be learning. So keep it moving. Also, it's social work. If you don't like one area, do something else. Like literally, I was telling somebody the other day, only boring people get bored in social work because there's so much you can do. Go into grant writing, go into development, go into, QA, QI work, go in, start your consulting firm, go into private practice, be an activist, go into labor union organizing. I don't care what you do it all, but don't, don't get hindered by it. It's like have a plan, generally, but it's okay if the plan is a little different than what you thought. Doesn't It's cool. Enjoy it. Enjoy the ride.
Yeah, I love that. I think kind of that balance between being intentional, but also allowing yourself to become and allowing space for your journey to unfold, which has been, I think, my central theme over the last 2 years. It was really you underscored it. And I was like, underscored it where? And it's like your speech, and I was like, I forgot that happened. I tried to black it out.
Happened 2 days ago.
Yeah. But I guess that's it for us. So we appreciate you taking the time. And for those listening, if you enjoyed this pilot, you can let Vale know. And it's her problem next year to figure it out. I'm going to stop recording now.